Rachel here from Rachel Rossi Design. Today I have a tutorial for you on how to do foundation paper piecing without tearing a single piece of paper. This is my favorite method because I get the consistency and the accuracy of traditional paper piecing without any of the annoying tearing papers. As a bonus, you can actually reuse these templates so we're not wasting lots of paper as we're sewing our quilts. I'm going to show you how to do this on my snail's pace pattern. This is one of the blocks that we'll be creating, and we are going to do it without tearing a single piece of paper. As I mentioned, we're going to be using my snail's pace pattern for this tutorial. As you can see, I used a solid shell just to make the process a little faster, but you can use scrappy shells if you'd like. That's what the template has on it. This method actually uses freezer paper as your foundation, which is why you can use these templates time and time again, and it also allows the fabric to stick to your template without damaging anything. There's a few different styles of foundation paper piecing. Mine is a little bit more messy and looks nice at the end. It's totally up to you how you prefer to do it. First, we're going to start by cutting apart our template pieces, and we're actually going to start with the shell because that's the easiest side to begin with. As we're just getting started, it's a good idea for you to take your template and on a light box or a window, trace out your lines. This isn't something that'll be necessary long term, but it really is helpful as you're getting started and getting used to this technique. We'll trace our lines and start with the largest numbers and work our way down. Once everything's traced, you can just add numbers to it. Also just helpful to get started. This is not something I do anymore now that I have the technique down, but it is helpful as you're still learning. Instead of sewing through your paper, we're actually going to make folds and sew along the paper. So what you want to do is get really nice crisp folds on your template. I just use this plastic template material. You can find it at craft stores. It's used for making templates, but it's just so thin and nice. I like to use it. So starting with your largest numbers, work your way down. And you're just putting that template piece along the line that you're trying to fold and getting a nice crisp edge. And remember, we're just going to treat the shell as one fabric rather than multiple fabrics, so we don't need to crease all those pieces. And there, everything's nice and folded, ready to go. Now we get to iron our first piece of fabric to our template. Take your shell fabric with the wrong side up and place your template on top of it with the waxy side facing the wrong side of your paper. Remember, this is one fabric shell, so we're counting this as piece number 1. Keep in mind that with this technique, you might have to let your iron set on your fabric and template a little bit longer than you normally would, sort of like you would expect from an iron-on transfer. So don't be afraid to set your iron for a second and then move. As you can see, that fabric's not going anywhere, which is why this is such a precise technique. So we treated that as piece number 1. Now we're going to skip to piece number 2. Use your fold line that you already created to fold along the crease between section 1 and 2. It's easiest to show you this part on a light box so that you can see what's happening. I don't typically use a light box here, but I thought it might be an easier way to show you what's happening between all the layers of your fabric. So what we would like to happen is we want our fabrics right sides together, and we want a 1/4 inch seam available for both pieces. So here it is on a light box. We have our shell, definitely covered on all 4 sides. We have our crease, and now we're going to add our second fabric right sides together. Make sure it's right sides together. And you want to see that there's at least 1/4 of an inch seam allowance right along the edge of your paper. And more is always better here. We can trim it off. Then we're going to sew very carefully right along the edge of our paper. Here we are at the sewing machine. My needle is down into the fabric, ready to sew right along the edge of that paper. Not on it, just as close as I can get to it. Foot number 1C, if you're a Bernina user, is great for this method because it has a line that shows you where that needle is going to land. So here I go, I'm just stitching down the very edge. If I hit the paper, it's not the end of the world. I just won't be able to use this template again, so I'll have to print a new one. But just getting as close as you can to that edge of the paper. So there you see it. I hit the paper a tiny bit, but no big deal. I might even still be able to use this template, but there's no stitches there for me to rip. Now we're going to go ahead and trim this, iron it, and move to piece number 3. So we've got our fabric laying flat and our paper folded back away from our fabric, and I'm using my add a quarter ruler to trim. It's got this great little ridge on it that sits against your paper and makes these 1/4 inch seams really, really quick work. So I simply just put it right against the paper. It's not going anywhere. Trim, and I'm done. I have a perfect 1/4 inch seam. And there you have it. So there's his shell and the first part of his body. Now we need to iron it. So I like to iron fabric side first. You can also use a seam roller here. I prefer ironing, but sometimes if you're using smaller pieces of fabric, it is a good idea to use a seam roller so that you don't get the freezer paper on the bottom of your iron. And then I turn it over and make sure that it's all nice and pressed right against my template. So we're going to fold back along the lines between piece number 2 and piece number 3. So I'm folding along that line. I'm going to grab piece number 3, I'm going to put it right side up so that our fabrics are right sides together. And now it's really easy to see that 1/4 inch seam because I can fold my fabric back and eyeball it and know that I have a definite 1/4 inch seam available to me. So we're going to sew along that edge just like we did before. So here we are again at the sewing machine. We're going to put our needle down first so that we're sure that our needle is going next to our paper, not in it, and do a tiny back stitch or securing stitch before you get started. So all the way down about 1/4 of an inch past where your line ends. And as you can see, we have not sewn in the paper, just very, very close to it. And we're ready to go. Now we're going to speed things up. Feel free to slow down the speed on your settings if you want to watch how this whole block comes together in real time. I'm going to speed it up for you so that you can still see how the process works throughout the whole block, and we'll slow down towards the end and finish this thing up. So we've got our shell and our head and our body. Now we need to move on to the background pieces. Never be afraid to double check yourself. You always want to check twice and sew once. When you're cutting, make sure that your fabrics are all laying flat. keep in mind that you just want to keep working from small numbers to large numbers, and make sure that your fabric will fit before you sew it on. Don't be afraid to take a peek, fold your fabric back and make sure that that 1/4 of an inch seam is there for you. As things come along, it's always good to get an idea of where you're at. We've got our body, our shell, and our background, and we just have one background piece left. It's easy on patterns like this to get confused, so feel free to mark or color in your template. Now we're going to slow things down so that you can see how to cut out your template and then complete your block. You'll see on my patterns you cut out along the dotted line. For some, you're going to want to add a 1/4 inch. It just depends on your pattern, so make sure you pay attention to this part. I like to trim my blocks out as I go. It's just nice to kind of see my progress and how things are going. You've got your template firmly secured to your fabric, and once I sew the head piece, I will join it along this edge right here, and we will have an adorable snail and no tearing. As you can see, it is so easy to peel this off, and then you can reuse it time and time again. I usually get about 3 or 4 uses out of each template. I've gone ahead and sewn the head block on, and we have one happy snail. For more information on foundation paper piecing, you can visit www.rachelrossi.design/FPP.